Chosen one, before you take another step into the weight of your day, before the noise of your circumstances drowns out the voice of heaven, speaking specifically and personally over your life right now, I need you to stop and receive what God has sent this message to declare over you. Not a general word, not an encouragement designed for a crowd. A specific and targeted declaration from the throne room of heaven directed at the exact situation you have been standing before in prayer and in faith and in the kind of exhausted persistence that only a chosen heart pressed to its limit can sustain. There is a door in your life that your enemies have been watching. They have studied it through every season of your waiting. They have observed you standing before it through the disappointment of seasons that brought you to the threshold of breakthrough, only to pull back without delivering what was promised. They watched the door remain sealed through your prayers, through your declarations, through your seasons of fasting and believing and pressing forward with everything faith could muster. And after watching long enough, they reached a conclusion that they have been speaking over your situation ever since. They called it permanently closed. They gathered the evidence of every season the door did not open, and they constructed from that evidence the most convincing argument they could, that the door before you was beyond the point of divine reversal. They spoke that conclusion through the voices of doubt that whispered in your mind. They reinforced it through the voices of people around you who meant well, but whose faith was smaller than the promise over your life. They embedded it in the circumstances surrounding your situation that seemed to harden with every passing season into something more and more resembling a permanent fixture rather than a temporary delay. But chosen one, your enemies made a mistake that all enemies of chosen hearts eventually make. They forgot who holds the keys. The God who holds every key there is not a single door in the entire created order, in the visible world or the invisible one, in the realm of human circumstance or the realm of spiritual reality, whose key does not belong to God. Not one. The enemy can study a door. He can post guards around it. He can declare it closed and celebrate its sealing and invest every resource available to him in maintaining the appearance of its permanent closure. But he does not hold the key. He has never held the key, and a door whose key belongs to God is never permanently closed, regardless of how convincingly the opposition presents the case for its permanent sealing. The book of Revelation contains a declaration that the enemy does not want you to meditate on, because its truth dismantles every argument he has ever constructed about the permanence of your closed door. God declares over a chosen people, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut, not an almost open door. Not a door that might open if the right conditions align. An open door. A door whose opening is already the established reality in the heavenly realm, even before it fully manifests in the visible one. And around that open door, God places a declaration of such absolute authority that every human and spiritual opposition that has ever been assembled against it is rendered powerless by the weight of 5 words. No one can shut it. No one, not the enemies who declared it permanently closed, not the spiritual forces that were assigned to maintain its sealed appearance. Not the voices of doubt that agreed with the closure, not the circumstances that reinforced the conclusion of permanence, not the passage of time that made the waiting feel endless, not any force that has ever been assembled against the opening of the doors God has decided to open over chosen lives. The door before you belongs to this category. God has the key. God has made the decision. And the opening that your enemies declared would never come is already underway. Why your enemies were so confident, chosen one. Let us be completely honest about something important. Your enemies were not unreasonable in the confidence of their conclusion. They had evidence, real evidence, the kind of evidence that accumulates through seasons of visible, unchanged circumstances and produces conclusions that seem not just reasonable, but virtually inescapable. They watched the door remain closed through your most sincere and sustained prayer. They watched it remain sealed through seasons when your faith felt stronger than it ever had before. They observed it show no visible movement through periods of fasting, through seasons of declaration, through moments when you felt heaven was so near that the breakthrough seemed seconds away before the silence returned and the door stood unchanged before you. They also watched the effect of the prolonged waiting on your interior life. They saw the moments when exhaustion crept into your faith and made your declarations sound slightly less certain than they once had. They noticed the seasons when hope contracted slightly under the weight of repeated disappointment. They observed the subtle shifts in how you approached the door, from the bold and expectant pressing of your earliest seasons of faith before it to the quieter and more guarded persistence of later seasons, when self-protection had learned to soften the edges of expectation so that disappointment would not cut as deeply if it came again. They observed all of this, and they used it to construct a case for permanent closure that was compelling enough to create agreement even in your own spirit at times. And that internal agreement was precisely what they were building toward, because they understood something that every enemy of chosen destiny understands. A person who internally agrees with the permanent closure of the door before them eventually stops positioning themselves to walk through it when it opens. They pull back from the threshold. They reorganize their life around the reality of the closed door. They build their future on a foundation that does not include what the closed door was supposed to release. And when God opens the door, they are no longer standing before it to receive what comes through it. This is what your enemies were hoping the evidence would produce in you. But it did not. You stayed. You remained at the threshold. You continued pressing against the door with whatever measure of faith was available to you in each successive season, even when that measure felt embarrassingly small compared to the magnitude of the promise the door was supposed to release. And that staying, that refusing to walk away from the threshold, regardless of how convincingly the evidence argued for permanent closure, is exactly what the spiritual work on the other side of the door required from you to reach its completion. The spiritual work on the other side here is something that will transform how you understand everything that has happened during the long season of the door appearing closed. While you were pressing against it from your side, God was working on it from the other side. And the work he was doing on the other side of the door was not less active or less purposeful during the seasons of visible silence than it was in the moments when breakthrough felt nearest. It was simply hidden, happening in the dimension of spiritual reality that your natural senses cannot access, but that is more fundamentally real than anything your physical eyes can see. The lock on this door was not a simple mechanism. It was a complex and multi-layered system of spiritual conditions that had to be met in precise sequence before the door could open fully and completely. Some of those conditions were on the other side of the door entirely, involving the positioning of people, the alignment of circumstances, the preparation of provision, and the arrangement of every element of what you are about to step into. God was working on all of those simultaneously during every season when the door appeared unchanged from your side. Other conditions were on your side of the door: the formation of your character through the waiting season, the deepening of your faith through the sustained testing, the humility produced by seasons of visible dependence on God rather than on your own ability to produce results, the compassion developed through your own experience of prolonged waiting that will make you a specific and irreplaceable source of hope for others still standing before their own doors. These conditions could not be rushed without producing a person who would walk through the door prematurely and be unable to sustain or steward what waited on the other side. God was working on both sides simultaneously. The silence was not absence. The unchanged appearance of the door was not evidence that nothing was happening. It was evidence that the most important work was happening in the dimension that produced visible results, rather than in the visible dimension itself. And now, chosen one, the work on both sides has reached the moment of its completion. The sequence of spiritual conditions has been met. The preparation on both sides of the door is complete. And the opening that your enemies declared would never come is no longer a future promise. It is a present reality moving quietly but irreversibly toward its full and visible manifestation. What quiet opening looks like, chosen one, it is essential that you understand the specific quality of the opening that is currently underway. Because the opening of this door is not loud. It is not dramatic in the way that the imagination pictures a long-awaited breakthrough arriving. It is not announcing itself to every observer with unmistakable fanfare that removes all ambiguity about what is happening. It is quiet, steady, deliberate, moving with the specific quality of divine purpose that does not require the validation of human observation to continue its work. And if you are not paying careful attention, you could miss the early signs of the opening in the same way that a person focused on the horizon can miss the sunrise happening directly above them. The quietness of the opening is not weakness. It is wisdom. God opens this door quietly for the same reason that the most consequential surgical work happens beneath the surface rather than above it. The depth and the precision and the thoroughness of the work require a quietness that dramatic announcements would interrupt. And beyond the practical dimension, the quiet opening has a strategic advantage that a dramatic one would not possess. The enemies who declared this door permanently closed have relaxed their vigilance around it. They are not watching it closely anymore. Their confidence in the permanence of the closure made them careless. And into that carelessness, God has been moving the door steadily forward past the point of easy reversal before the opposition even realized that the opening was underway. By the time the opening is fully visible to every observer around you, it will already be irreversible. The door will not be standing slightly ajar in a position that continued opposition could push back to closed. It will be standing fully and permanently open, held in place by the unshakable authority of the God who decided to open it, past the point of any reversal that any enemy could produce. The quiet opening is almost complete. Watch for its surface expressions in the days immediately ahead. The surface signs of the opening as the quiet opening moves toward its full manifestation in your visible circumstances. Chosen one, there are specific signs that will begin appearing that confirm the underground work is reaching the surface. These signs are important to recognize because they are the early evidence of the opening, and receiving them with faith rather than dismissing them as coincidence will accelerate your positioning at the threshold. The first sign is a shift in the spiritual atmosphere surrounding the door. The heaviness that has characterized the area of your situation connected to this door will begin lightening. The specific weight that pressed down on your spirit every time you approach the door in prayer will begin feeling less dense. There will be a new quality of openness in the spiritual atmosphere around the situation that prayer will begin to sense before any visible circumstance has changed to explain it. The second sign is unexpected information. Details about the situation connected to the door will begin becoming available to you that were previously hidden or inaccessible. Conversations will happen that shed light on what has been happening on the other side of the door. Knowledge will surface that reframes your understanding of the situation in ways that increase your confidence that the opening is real and advancing. This information is heaven's way of orienting your expectation toward the threshold so that you are positioned to receive what comes through it. The third sign is movement in previously immovable elements. People who were resistant will begin softening. Circumstances that seemed completely fixed will begin showing signs of flexibility. Situations that appeared to have reached their final form will begin demonstrating an openness to change that was not previously present. These movements will initially seem small and easily explained by natural causes, but they are the surface expressions of the divine work that has been advancing on the other side of the door, and they are signs that the opening is reaching the point of visible manifestation. The fourth sign is a returning of specific hope. Not general optimism, but a specific and particular hope connected to the promise behind this door. A sense that the thing you have been believing for is not just theoretically possible, but actually approaching. A feeling in your spirit that the gap between where you are and where the promise is has begun closing in a new way. This specific hope is not wishful thinking. It is your spirit discerning, in the invisible realm, what is about to become visible in the natural one. Position yourself at the threshold chosen one. There is a practical and spiritually significant response that this message is calling you to make. It is the response of positioning, deliberately and intentionally placing yourself at the threshold of the door that is quietly opening so that when the opening reaches its full visible expression, you are standing directly before it, ready to receive what flows through it and prepared to walk through it into everything God has placed on the other side. Positioning at the threshold means returning to active and expectant prayer over this specific situation, not the going through the motions prayer of a waiting season that has lasted too long, but the alert and engaged prayer of someone who has received intelligence that the door is opening and whose prayer is now a partnering with the opening rather than a petition for it to begin. Positioning at the threshold means speaking the promise over the situation again with fresh conviction. Every declaration of what God said about this door, rather than what your enemies said about it, is a step toward the threshold. Every affirmation of the opening over the agreement with the closure is a repositioning of your spirit from the resigned distance of a long wait to the alert expectancy of someone standing directly before a door in the moment of its opening. Positioning at the threshold means making the practical preparations that walking through this door will require. Begin preparing in practical ways for what you have been believing for, not as presumption, but as faith that has received the news of the opening and is responding appropriately. These preparations are declarations in the physical realm of what your spirit has received in the spiritual one. and they align every dimension of your life with the reality of the opening that is already complete in heaven and advancing toward full expression on earth. The door is open, chosen one. Receive this final declaration with the full and open posture of a spirit that has waited long enough and has now been given the news it has been standing before a closed door to receive. The door your enemies called permanently closed is opening right now. The conclusion they reached from the evidence of your long waiting was a conclusion drawn without access to the most important information available about your situation. They did not know what God was doing on the other side of the door. They did not account for the faithfulness of the God who holds every key. They did not factor in the power of the persistent faith of a chosen heart that refused to walk away from the threshold, regardless of how long the door remained visibly unchanged. They were wrong. The door is opening. The opening is quiet, but it is real. It is steady, but it is irreversible. It is gentle, but it is advancing past the point where any opposition can stop it. And what comes through this open door into your life will be so thoroughly and completely the answer to every prayer you have prayed before it, that your testimony will become one of the most powerful declarations of divine faithfulness that anyone in your circle of influence has ever heard. Stand at the threshold, chosen one. The door is opening, and what God releases through it will prove beyond any remaining doubt that no door he decides to open can ever be permanently closed by any enemy who ever declared otherwise. Type Amen if you receive this declaration today. Share this message with someone standing before a door their enemies have called permanently closed. They need to know that God holds the key and the opening has already begun.